Welcome back to part 2, where I'm interviewing Grant Fitzwilliam, who is Managing Director and co-founder at 3C Insight, on KPIs in shared services. And this week we're looking at purchase to pay KPIs, which, why, when, and how. So Grant, let's kick off with the first question. What are the 3 must-haves as far as KPIs are concerned within the purchase to pay process?
I would rank cost per invoice, which is probably no surprise to anybody, as number 1. That is the overall measure as far as productivity and efficiency goes. And again, from a definitional standpoint, what you include in a cost might be slightly different than other companies, but as long as you're consistently measuring it internally, you'll be able to build up the trend analysis that hopefully shows that you're improving over time. Second of all, we recommend looking at supplier payments on time, something that is not necessarily at the top of people's lists, but it really measures the effectiveness of the procure-to-pay department in terms of knowing when you're complying with terms and conditions that may have been set by the procurement department. And a good score in that area is something north of 90%. Really good is 95+% in terms of supplier payments on time. And then thirdly, a driver of productivity and measuring of efficiency is percentage of automated invoices. It can have a huge impact on the cost per transaction. And typically a good score in that KPI is anything north of 80%. And one sort of overarching comment I'd like to make is that what we typically see is that average performers' scores are 3 times lower than the top performers. So just in terms of how much improvement the average company can make, the improvement opportunity is dramatic in terms of the cost per transaction as well as supply payments on time and also automation rates. Making a 3-fold improvement can dramatically improve your operations.
So obviously those are the 3 must-haves. Now let's move away from those must-have KPIs and have a look at whether or not there are any surprising KPIs that are often overlooked by purchase-to-pay environments but really shouldn't be. Can you think of any in particular, Grant?
2 worth mentioning. The first one is billing frequency, to be able to identify if you're having any problems with suppliers who are billing you too frequently, and especially if that's in a manual manner. And there are a couple of examples that spring to mind. First of all, we have FedEx, who will bill you on a default basis by billing you on a weekly basis by location, which can drive a tremendous amount of invoices on a monthly basis and all very small amounts. A similar example I've seen is a uniform vendor who provides new uniforms and cleaning services for uniforms, who would bill on a per uniform basis. So if they were providing hundreds of uniforms or cleaning services on a monthly basis, you're getting 1 per uniform. And again, communicating with these suppliers can dramatically change the volume, and by having some KPI focused on that billing frequency, you'll be able to isolate those opportunities. I think second of all, the supplier payments, which I did mention in the top 3, normally this is not high up on people's lists. And the reason we think it should be more important is because by stretching payment terms beyond due dates, you're going to negatively impact your cost per transaction in the payables area, because you're maybe making special payment runs to facilitate paying somebody who's been paid late. You're also manually determining who to pay and when to pay based on judgments. And then third of all, you are going to be fielding a lot of calls and inquiries from these suppliers wanting to know when they're going to be paid and why they haven't been paid. And it also will obviously potentially damage your relationship with the procurement department, who's gone to great lengths to determine what the correct payment terms are by balancing the trade-offs between payment discounts and payment extension.
Okay, let's have a look at who should be involved in the KPI build within purchase to pay, because purchase to pay organizations can start to look quite kind of complex. They have often a run in shared services operations, so there's a shared services director, shared services center manager, and then possibly a global process owner for purchase to pay, then there'll possibly a head of AP. Who should be involved in the KPI build, and whom should the KPI set be reported to?
I think for those organizations that have a global P2P owner, they are in a very strong position compared to companies who don't. And that's because without the collaboration between purchasing and payables, you're going to leave a lot of opportunity on the table. So again, who's the main focus? I think it's the Chief Financial Officer. The best performers I've seen in P2P have involved a highly focused Chief Financial Officer. An example is a large retailer that I know that has an automation rate in payables of 98%, and the CFO knows what that percentage is on a monthly basis and can tell you the history of that percentage. So I think the CFO is underestimated in terms of being involved in this and the value that they can play. I mentioned on our previous segment the top 500 technique, where the procurement department may be more focused on the top vendors as opposed to all of them, because those are the relationships that they're directly involved in. And then finally, the business unit leaders, whichever businesses, lines of business or product owners that you're supporting, need to be involved in measuring and defining what those measures are.
My final question in this chapter, Grant, is what is an example of KPIs having driven a certain improvement in purchase to pay? Could you draw on one or two of those examples for the audience, please?
Sure. I think the ability for KPIs to have drill down. In other words, being able to know what data sits underneath that KPI and have it available as part of the KPI analysis and evaluation process. So if I could just go back to those top three, if you think about the percent of automated invoices, having the drill down underneath that one to show which vendors are providing you or sending you the most manual invoices on a monthly basis would give you greater insight into knowing where to focus your efforts in terms of improvement. There's multiple methods of automation, so one size does not fit all, and identifying a handful of vendors on a periodic basis to go and automate is key. The same thing applies to if you're looking at manual adjustments to either invoice amounts or payment amounts. Knowing which vendors are providing the most manual adjustments can give you a bigger bang for your buck by focusing on those ones, again, with the high volume. And so, again, I think having the drill down, and it's not necessarily the drill down into every single transactions, but it's the ones that maybe a top 10 or a top 20 list that give you the area of focus.
Grant Fitzwilliam, Managing Director at 3C Insight, many thanks indeed. Make sure that you join us for next week's part 3, where we'll be looking at the KPIs that you really should be using within your order to cash process. Thank you and goodbye.